The high-stakes meeting between President-elect Trump and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
It is a significant meeting at a significant moment for this country.
Prime Minister, was it a productive meeting with President-elect?
It was an excellent conversation.
It's been a very challenging week for the Prime Minister, for the country, for businesses, for premiers who all got this social media post from Donald Trump on Monday and kind of panicked, frankly, about the reality and the crushing impact this would have on Canada's economy.
President-elect Donald Trump's proposed tariffs on Canada haven't even gone into effect, and it's already plunged Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government into turmoil. On Monday, Trudeau's one-time ally, the Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, resigned in the most un-Canadian way.
Justin Trudeau has announced he's stepping down as the Prime Minister of Canada and as the leader of his party.
I intend to resign as party leader, as Prime Minister, after the party selects its next leader.
When you threatened tariffs on Canada, Justin Trudeau rushed down here. He wanted to make nice. Now he's on the way out. Is that what you wanted?
I didn't think he was going to quit. I spoke to Governor Trudeau on numerous occasions, and we'll see what happens. So we'll be announcing the tariffs on Canada and Mexico of 25% on Canada and separately 25% on Mexico.
Canadians brace for economic turmoil as the reality of a full-blown trade war with the U.S. sinks in.
They owe us a lot of money, and I'm sure they're going to pay.
We didn't ask for this, but we will not back down.
The real fear about what comes next for crucial Canadian industries.
It's devastating. It'll devastate us, and it'll impact quickly.
And the anger growing across the country.
You announced tariffs on Canada and Mexico. You immediately got action from both of them on border security and drug interdiction.
I did. A lot of action.
Is that good enough?
Is that good enough? No, it's not good enough.
So more needed in 30 days.
Something has to happen. It's not sustainable.
U.S. President Donald Trump said on Thursday that his proposed 25% tariffs on Mexican and Canadian goods will go into effect on March 4th as scheduled.
But very importantly, tomorrow tariffs 25% on Canada and 25% on Mexico, and that'll start.
U.S. President Donald Trump said on Monday that 25% tariffs on imports from Canada and Mexico will go into effect on Tuesday.
On the tariffs, is there any room left for Canada and Mexico to make a deal before midnight?
No room left.
This is a policy decision by the American government designed to go after the Canadian economy. This is a trade war. Yes, Canadians are hurt. Canadians are angry. We're going to choose to not go on vacation, and we're going to choose to try to buy Canadian products, and yeah, we're probably going to keep booing the American anthem. But Donald, that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do.
Hi, I'm Candice Malcom, and this is the Candice Malcom Show. Wow, what a news day. What an incredible story. And we are here. We are facing a trade war with our closest friend and ally. You could see the escalation happen over the past 3 months. How did we get here, and how are leaders responding? We're going to get to it all today. We've got a great show lined up. And at the end of the show, pleased to be joined by independent MPP Bobbi Ann Brady. So let's get right into the show. Today, I am joined by Clyde Nichols. Clyde is known as Clyde Do Something online. He's an auto mechanic during his day job and a political commentator and content creator who posts daily videos on news and politics about Canada. Clyde, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Well, thanks for having me.
So what an incredible series of events that we have just lived through and has unfolded over the last few months. And everything kind of came to an end yesterday, where the tariffs were introduced and Justin Trudeau came out and hit right back. So we did the show yesterday with Hamish Marshall. We covered that press conference live, but I want to just highlight a few things that happened yesterday. So at that press conference, Justin Trudeau announced the retaliatory tariffs and vowed that they will remain until the U.S. tariffs are lifted. Let's play that clip.
Canada will be implementing 25% tariffs against $155 billion worth of American goods, starting with tariffs on $30 billion worth of goods immediately, and tariffs on the remaining $125 billion of American products in 21 days' time.
Those are the taxes that Canadians will pay, right? Trump's tariffs are going to impact Americans. Trudeau's tariffs are going to impact Canadians. And Trudeau took it one level further, right? Like, this to me seems like a personality feud between Trump and Trudeau. They don't like each other, and they're just ramping up the ante here. And here is Prime Minister Trudeau. This was sort of the one clip that went viral, the most viral yesterday, from his press conference, speaking directly to the American president, calling him by his first name and saying that this is a very dumb thing to do. Let's play that clip.
Now, it's not in my habit to agree with the Wall Street Journal, but Donald, they point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do.
And he went on by saying that Canadians were not going to go to Florida on vacation and that we're going to continue to boo their national anthem. Let's play that clip.
We're going to choose to not go on vacation in Florida or Old Orchard Beach or wherever. We're going to choose to try to buy Canadian products and forego bourbon and other classic American products. And yeah, we're probably going to keep booing the American anthem.
So, Clyde, I want to hear your thoughts on this. Look, I don't think that Trump has been very clear, as you could see from that intro, of all the different things back and forth, his demands, what the issue is. We don't even really know if the issue is fentanyl and the border, which is what he originally said, or if it's something more like Trump wanting to fund the U.S. government with tariffs rather than income taxes, and whether it's just like a general trade strategy. But I want to get your opinion on Trudeau and how you think he's been handling all of this, and whether you think that anything that he said yesterday was something that would benefit Canadians.
Well, I think he's been handling it terribly, obviously. And that's the case. I want to address one thing. When he says that Canadians are foregoing anything like vacations or certain products, it's because they can't afford it. It's not because that they don't, they're doing some trade war thing. And I'd like to say that this is not a trade war. In fact, what a lot of people are in the media are saying is confusing is a confusion of their own, I think. Donald Trump is not saying something that's very confusing. He said specifically that he's got two sets of tariffs that are going to be coming on. The first set is a punitive set of tariffs, and those punitive tariffs are because of Canada's behavior. It's because of the border. It's because of the fentanyl crisis. It's because of what we've been allowing in our country and allowing to flow across the border. Now, the second set of tariffs, they'll be coming in on April 2nd, and those are reciprocal tariffs. We hear a lot about reciprocal tariffs, but this is what this is going to be about. Canada has had a tremendous amount of trade restrictions, trade barriers for a very long time. And I think Donald Trump is really just addressing this.
You're right. I think that a lot of Canadians are sort of like clutching their pearls and jumping to this Canadian nationalism movement that we have to like fight fire with fire. And I don't see a lot of internal like retrospective look at our own policies. In fact, what we do see is kind of like gaslighting, saying that Canada doesn't have tariffs or that we don't ban American businesses, which is just obviously not true. Canada's economy is incredibly protectionist. We have so many limitations on what you can, like what kind of American businesses can open here, the competition. So much of it is restrictive. We'll get to that a bit later in the show. That specific point, though, about how Canadians shouldn't go down and visit the States. I think you're right that a lot of Canadians can't afford those kind of things. But it's also true that a lot of Canadians spend a lot of their time in the US. Like there's a whole category of Canadians called snowbirds that basically live in Southern American states for the winter months. And in many ways, it's cheaper for them, right? If you go down to parts of Florida, it's much, the cost of living is so much lower down there. Same with places like Arizona or New Mexico. Depending on where in Canada you live, I know so many people whose parents like basically live in the US for half the year, and then they come back, in order to collect their benefits or whatever. So we had Florida Governor Ron DeSantis saying this. Here's a clip of him yesterday saying that 3.3 million people from Canada come to Florida every year. Let's play that clip.
We continue to set tourism records. 2024 saw more than 142 million visitors come to the state of Florida. This includes 3.3 million visitors from Canada. That's not much of a boycott in my book. Maybe they wanted to get a glimpse of what a Stanley Cup winning hockey team actually looks like.
Oh, that hurts. That was unnecessary there, Governor DeSantis. But aside from the hockey comment, I mean, he's right. Like, Canadians aren't going to just all of a sudden stop going to the States. I think that there is a contingent of people who are, putting on their Canadian nationalism hat right now and saying, like, let's fight fire with fire, and kind of leaning into this. It's a good political message, particularly for the Liberal Party. But I just can't imagine Canadians, keeping up a boycott. Like, how can you boycott? So much of our goods come from the United States. Like, unless we're going to start closing down like Walmart and McDonald's and all these major American brands in our country, I don't see that really having any impact. I don't think that Canadians are going to stop traveling to the United States. What do you think?
Well, I think there's a bit of a nationalistic fervor that's people wrapping themselves in the flag, but it's very reminiscent of like early 2020 COVID era. Let's rally together, 2 weeks to flatten the tariffs. It really is sad to see our fellow Canadians going down this exact same path. Now, on this whole tariff, the reciprocal tariffs coming from the Canadian side, this is only going to hurt Canadians at the end of the day. It's only going to hurt Canadians, and it's only going to hurt trade or relations within Canada. As we see right now, there's moves from people in Alberta to distance themselves from Ottawa. And what is that going to end up looking like? Well, only the future can tell, because I don't see any politicians at the same time talking about hard times for Canadians, easing up on the restrictions that they have, like, for example, the transfer payments that Alberta has to make to the other provinces. Those aren't on the table. While everything is on the table, and no cost is too high to go against the United States, the political class is really not considering any of these things, including the dairy cartel.
Well, it's so interesting because Canada is already facing a cost of living crisis. When you look at the polls and you ask Canadians, what is the top issue facing you and your family? What is the main thing that's going to motivate you to vote in the next election? It's the cost of living and how incredibly unaffordable everything from housing to food to gasoline is. I mean, even just the idea of food security, like having access to fresh fruit and vegetables in your grocery store. That was already a concern for Canadians. And then on top of that, now you're telling us that for everything that's been imported from the United States, we have to pay an additional 25% tax on, in hopes that maybe it'll change Trump's mind. Like, I think it's such a bad sell to Canadians. And the fact that every single political party has the same view on this and has the same opinion, it's frustrating. So I want to move over to Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives and his response, because even though fundamentally I don't agree that Canada should be retaliating with these tariffs, I think that a better path would be, let's just try to negotiate a deal with Trump, however that may look. Regardless, I disagree with the idea of the tariffs, but I felt like Pierre Poilievre's message yesterday was really strong. I felt like this was the best Poilievre that we've seen on this topic. So I'm going to play a few clips for you here. So this was Poilievre announcing what happened and talking about how the Americans have stabbed their best friends in the back. Let's play that clip.
At 12:01 a.m., President Trump stabbed America's best friend in the back. My message to the President is this: Canada will fight back. We will defend our people and our economy, and we will put Canada first.
And strong message, very firm. And then he also notes that the fact that we're in this mess isn't necessarily just because of Donald Trump. It's because the Liberals have abdicated their responsibilities. They've let Canadians down. They haven't secured the border. They've allowed the drug crisis to spiral out of control. The idea that we have fentanyl labs, like super labs, operating in Canada by foreign nationals, by the way, by foreign gangs. We know this is happening and it has been allowed to go unchecked. Maybe they're cracking down on it now, but it's too little too late. So here is Pierre Poilievre saying that the Liberals have simply not done enough.
The question was, have the Liberals done enough on fentanyl, and is that a good justification for Trump's tariffs? And the answer to both questions is no and no. No, the Liberals have not done enough on fentanyl, but not because they should have been doing it for Trump. They should have been doing it for Canadians.
So that's absolutely right. But then he goes on to say that's still not justification for these kinds of tariffs. So what do you think of Poilievre's response there, and how do you think he's handling this?
Well, I think the gravitas towards Pierre Poilievre was this common sense narrative, speaking truth to power. Talk about what's actually happening. What I hear coming out of him right now, I don't really buy that. I hear him saying a lot of platitudes, things that people want to hear, but not really the truth. We're not in a strong position as Canada, and yes, it is the Liberals' fault. But we can't go to the table negotiating as if we're in a strong position. We have to be honest about this, and we have to say, listen, we're going to have to capitulate to some of these demands. And I don't think that they're being realistic about the actual crackdown on the fentanyl crisis. When we see super labs getting, taken down by the RCMP, and only the janitor is being apprehended in those cases, the case that happened in British Columbia just recently, only one man was apprehended, arrested, and is being charged. An Indian guy, when they say it's Mexican cartels that were operating it, it doesn't lend to a good sense of Canada is cracking down on these things. It lends to more of the corruption that we've seen throughout the past 10 years or even longer in Canada. And I think this is part of what Donald Trump wants to crack down on. And again, I'm going to go back to the stick to my guns here. The first round of tariffs, the blanket 25% tariffs on Canada, are punitive. And it's been very clear that this is about the border. It's about fentanyl. It's about terrorists in Canada, because of our lax immigration, being able to enter the United States. The second round of tariffs that hasn't even come into play, that would be trade war territory. We haven't even entered that market yet.
Well, I want to jump to U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and his response. So in an interview on Fox News Business, Lutnick said that Canada and Mexico were on the phone all day yesterday with the Trump administration, and that there may be a deal yet to come. So, this might not be here to stay. It might have just been a warning. Hard to make out again, but let's play that clip.
Both the Mexicans and the Canadians were on the phone with me all day today, trying to show that they'll do better. And the president's listening, because he's very, very fair and very reasonable. So I think he's going to work something out with them. It's not going to be a pause, none of that pause stuff. But I think he's going to figure out, you do more, and I'll meet you in the middle some way. And we're going to probably be announcing that tomorrow. So somewhere in the middle will likely be the outcome. The president moving with the Canadians and Mexicans, but not all the way.
That's interesting. I want to stick with Lutnick because he also criticized Justin Trudeau, saying that hopefully Canadians will select a new leader, and adding that the Canadians like to cheat. Let's play that clip.
Trudeau, who's about to leave the government, and obviously he should leave the government with his kind of talking. He's leaving the government. Hopefully they'll elect someone who's clever, who comes down and says to Donald Trump, we want to do business with you. We want to do business fairly, and we're going to get rid of all this nonsense. They got a digital tax in Canada. They try to tax our tech companies. What happened to USMCA? I tell you what happened to it. The Canadians like to cheat.
So it's really interesting because there's these two dynamics, right? It's like, yes, there's the fentanyl and drug issue and the border issue. That's something that Trudeau has been weak on from the very beginning of his administration. And that is the area, it seems, that Lutnick is saying that they're on the phones and they might be able to reach a deal on those. And then to your point that you made about the second round of tariffs coming in April, that will be more to do with like evening the playing field and noting that Canadians cheat. This is something that we don't really like to admit to ourselves, that Canadians cheat. But I mean, the whole concept of reciprocity in international trade is that you have equal access to one another's markets. And it's just not the case that the Americans have equal access to the Canadian market because we have so many different taxes that we put. I mean, he mentioned the digital sales tax, but then we also have all kinds of subsidies. We have all kinds of regulations that prevent foreign entities from operating in federally regulated spaces, be it banking, digital like telecommunication companies, airlines. There's no shortage of areas where Canada just doesn't open up its market to the Americans, and yet we expect that they should open their market to us and allow us to have access. It's like, I don't think, like, I'll just preface this all by saying, I don't agree with what Trump is doing. I think it's terrible. I don't think it's a good idea for the Americans to have an unstable North America. I think that the Americans would benefit from a better agreement, leveling the playing field. Maybe this is just how Trump wants to get there. But there's a lot of issues at play, a lot of moving parts, and I think, suggesting that maybe we'll get some relief from these tariffs today might be a little bit of a silver lining. What do you think?
Well, first off, I want to say that this clip is indicative. It really is indicative of how our government operates and how they speak out of both sides of their mouth. Justin Trudeau comes to the Canadian populace and he says, listen, I'm being super tough. Listen to me talk about Donald Trump by his first name. And then they get on the phone with the Americans and they say, listen, can we fix that? What can we do? What can we get done? They're not working on getting these things done because there's a whole structure of it is really corrupt here in Canada. And I think a lot of Canadians don't want to really come to grips with that. A lot of the corruption runs very deep, and it would expose a lot of them. And this is why there's so much reluctance on actually airing this. I mean, Sam Cooper has been bringing so much of this stuff to light, and it goes to the highest levels of government. So yeah, of course, they're reluctant to make any moves on the fentanyl issue. But of course, they're going to speak different language out of both sides of their mouth, one to one audience and another to another.
Well, let's move on to Donald Trump's response to all of this, because I mean, in some ways, he's pouring gas on the fire by just continuing to poke and prod Trudeau. And I think every time he does this, to your point about like the 2020 panic, like it strikes fear in Canadians and they don't like it. And it seems like that's helping the Liberals in the polls. So it's almost like it's a song and dance now. But posting on Truth Social yesterday, President Trump said the following. He said, please explain to Governor Trudeau of Canada that when he puts a retaliatory tariff on the US, a reciprocal tariff will immediately increase by a like amount. And then he also wrote that Canada doesn't allow American banks to do business in Canada, but their banks flood the American market. Oh, that seems fair to me, doesn't it? And, okay, so first of all, just say that when it comes to Canada putting in our own reciprocal tariffs, and then Trump saying we're going to come back even harder, but then you have Howard Lutnick on the other side saying we're going to strike a deal. It's not going to be a pause, but we're going to come to some kind of agreement. You're seeing two different messages. So I don't know if they're playing this game intentionally, like good cop, bad cop, but then Trump makes that point about how Canada doesn't allow American banks to do business. And I want to kind of zero in on that a little bit, because Elon Musk jumped in on X and wrote, it's a valid point. The rules are asymmetric. And so pointing out this idea that Americans have, that Canada has access to the American banks and not vice versa. And then it's interesting, if we can show that Elon Musk X post, he says it's a valid point, the rules are asymmetric. The community notes jumped in and slapped a community note on there, basically just saying that this is wrong. And then later they had to correct their community note, and it says clarification, American banks do business in Canada, but with restrictions Canadian banks do not have in America. And then you can see there's a couple of links there. And so if you click on the CBC link, it says that Trump falsely claims that US banks aren't allowed to do business in Canada. What does he mean? Trump's claim isn't true, but foreign entry into Canadian bank sector is challenging. And then this is supposedly a fact check on whether or not American banks are allowed to do business. This is an example, Clyde, of the CBC gaslighting Canadians, right? They say right here that they're fact-checking Donald Trump and he is false, he is wrong, that American banks are allowed to do business in Canada. But the problem is, when you read the article and it explains the different rules, you can see that it's true, that you don't have commercial banks in Canada. Like, you can't just walk into a Wells Fargo or a Bank of America branch in Canada. They don't exist. The opposite is true, though. If you are in the United States, in many states, you can walk into a TD or an RBC. They have branches. You can open up a checking account. You can go and do business at a Canadian bank. In Canada, they have two different sort of types of banks. And so they're kind of making an argument that they can do business in Canada if they want to. They just have to get a different license, and it would require them to like buy a Canadian bank, and that there is this kind of like obscure pathway for American banks to do business in Canada. They just don't want to, which is just not true. It's like we can walk around the country and just see that there aren't American banks here. There, you can walk into a CIBC and RBC, but you can't walk into one of these American brands. So to me, it just seems like we're not being honest about the situation. We're pretending that things are there that aren't. And it's just, this is part of the problem with Canada in general. We have a super protectionist country. We don't allow a lot of outsiders to come in to do business. We have a lot of restrictions, even on Canadian businesses. And then we go and pretend like we're completely innocent, and it's just entirely Donald Trump and Elon Musk being crazy. What do you think?
Well, you beat me to the punch. I mean, I was going to say, you don't have to listen to CBC News. You just walk out your door and go to the Wells Fargo and try to, oh, you can't. Go to Bank of America. Oh, you can't, because they're not allowed to operate in Canada. Now, there is some truth to it. There are banks that are, operating in Canada for limited access. So that's a thing. Canadian banks can operate in America. It's absolutely open to them. And what happens when they operate in America? Well, TD Bank was fined billions of dollars for money laundering in the United States. So obviously the United States is looking at Canada and going, hold on a second. Are you a good neighbor? We've always loved you. We always thought of you. We thought of you as quaint, innocent neighbors that are always kind and polite. And as soon as we raise a little bit of a stink about what's going on, you freak out on us. You lose your mind. And really, I hate to say this, but when it comes to the Canadian market, we're in such a bad position to be coming at the United States with demands. We're in a bad position to do all of this. But then when we doubly go to sporting events and we boo the national anthem when a veteran is singing, and we do all of these things, and we say on social media some pretty nasty things that I wouldn't even repeat on this show, what it does is it's fueling the American side. Donald Trump can come to the table and he's saying, I have the popularity right now. And with the Canadians and what they're doing, they'll allow me to make these punitive measures now. We don't even feel bad about it anymore. And that's not a position we want to be in as Canadians. And we don't want our politicians coming to the table like this. And I think Pierre Poilievre, if he switched back to what his original rhetoric was, and perhaps even go down unilaterally, why the Liberals can break all the rules and conservatives can't, go down, go talk to Donald Trump and start talking a better game. Stop talking from your PR outfit out of Ottawa. We're tired of hearing it. People are sick of it. Go down there, make some moves, and take the risk of upsetting people with Trump derangement syndrome. Because I'll guarantee you, when it comes down to a general election, if you sound like liberal light, you're going to get voted on like liberal light, and it's not going to do well in the polls.
I agree. That should be the takeaway from the last election. Like, we tried that in 2021, and it turns out that if Canadians want to elect a liberal, they'll just elect a liberal. They won't elect a conservative talking like a liberal. I do worry that Trump derangement syndrome is so widespread in Canada, and particularly for people who watch the CBC or still get their media from the legacy media, that the optics of Poilievre going down to try to strike a deal for Canadians would end up costing him a chance at becoming prime minister. I might be wrong on that. And I think
I doubt it. I honestly doubt it. And the reason why I say this, the reason why it doesn't work is because we're told it doesn't work. Donald Trump being elected twice was said to not work. And he did. And he did it because he spoke truth to power. He spoke truth, all of the things that Americans had brewing and they were thinking, but they knew was politically incorrect and couldn't say out loud. He came out and he said it, and it was relief. It was relieving to hear somebody come out and say it. We need somebody like that in Canada. And who's it going to be? Obviously we have Maxime Bernier saying a bunch of stuff. I don't think that that's a viable thing. I think a mainstream political candidate needs to start saying the truth.
Well, I want to touch back on that point that you're making about how Trump has a huge mandate. And right now he has the popularity and his agenda is incredibly popular. So I watched last night, he addressed a joint session of Congress, which is sort of like the State of the Union for the first year in office. And hearing him talk about his policy objectives and his early wins, like he's already drastically reduced the number of illegal people walking across the border in the South. I think it's down 92% in the first month, which is just absolutely incredible. It shows you that all it really does take is political will. This idea of completely banning men from competing in women's sports, and that if a school allows a man to play on a girls' team, they no longer get any federal funding. Like really putting forth this agenda that is incredibly popular, that is incredibly needed. And frankly, so many of these policies would be happily welcomed in Canada as well. I think that even people in like even Americans, Republicans that believe in free trade and they believe in limited restrictions, they're going to give Trump time to see if this works. Like they're going to allow him to have a long road when it comes to tariffs, even if they philosophically don't agree with tariffs. So they don't know if this is the right direction. I mean, the stock market is taking a real hit from these policies, but I think that people are open to hearing and waiting. So I want to play a few clips of President Trump speaking last night, addressing Congress, and particularly the ones that relate to Canada. So here is Trump saying that other countries have used tariffs against us for decades, and now it's our turn. And I think this is right. I think that Canada does have restrictions, and we're not an innocent party here. So let's play that clip.
If you don't make your product in America, however, under the Trump administration, you will pay a tariff, and in some cases, a rather large one. Other countries have used tariffs against us for decades, and now it's our turn to start using them against those other countries.
And here is Trump again talking about reciprocal tariffs coming into effect on April 2nd.
April 2nd, reciprocal tariffs kick in. And whatever they tariff us, other countries, we will tariff them. That's reciprocal, back and forth. Whatever they tax us, we will tax them.
So that's his philosophy. That's his idea, that is how he's going to run the government. And I don't personally agree with it. I don't like it. I don't think it's good for Canada at all. But I think that, again, people are going to give him the opportunity to try and see how it works for the American economy. What do you think?
What's the rule of, mutual assured destruction, and the Americans have the ability to use this. They have a bigger weapon. They have the bigger economy. And to say we'll put on reciprocal tariffs, and the goal in that is to remove all tariffs. Well, that's good. That means easing up restrictions. That means easing up. So I hear a lot of people saying that this is about protectionism. This is about ending protectionism. A lot of states not United States, but states, governments around the world have their own protectionist measures that are just ridiculous. I mean, look at Canada. In 2024, we went to the British, we went to talk with the Brits about trade negotiation, and they told us to come back when we've put our big boy pants on, because we wouldn't walk away from the dairy lobby and 250% tariffs on dairy products. It's ridiculous, the position that we're coming from. And yeah, we're going to get spanked now. We're in a situation where Donald Trump is coming in and he's saying, we want the same deal you got. We want things to work well for us, just as it works well for you. And this is how we're going to do it. We're going to give you the same fair playing field. And if you don't like the rules that we're putting on, we'll just restrict those rules and we'll just follow back. And that's really what that comes down to.
And I hope that works. I think that would be the rational response for Canada, to say, okay, let's just stop and look at ourselves. We may not like Trump, we may not like the messenger, but some of these facts are true. And in the long run, we'd all be better off if we just had complete open access to one another's markets. And
well, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be very difficult there, because obviously they understand this. Every single one running for government or who is in government understands this, because they're saying the same thing. They're saying, if you put a tariff on us, we'll put a tariff back on you. So it's the same thing. And they know that the purpose of that is to alleviate the tariffs. But the problem in Canada is that there's not a lot of political will to talk about some serious issues. Supply management is run run by a lot of politically powerful people. And unless that's confronted, we're not really going to be moving on from this story. And it's the first time that a foreign country has put this much pressure on an internal struggle that we have in our political system. We know that the dairy cartel can make or break politicians, and it's gonna be the case that it's gonna make or break Canada at this point.
I completely agree. If I were a political leader, I would say, let's use this opportunity to get rid of it. Yes, there are vested interests, and there's some farmers that have come to rely on this, and will give them that fair compensation, but this program ends and we open up the market. I just don't see that happening from any political party. And in fact, the opposite is happening. Rather than saying, let's start eliminating a lot of our own barriers, our political leaders are responding back saying, we're going to add even more. We're going to try to make it even more painful for the United States. Ontario Premier Doug Ford is sort of leading this charge. And so yesterday, he announced that he supported retaliatory tariffs against the U.S., that they would start banning American alcohol, banning American businesses from being part of Ontario's procurement, and canceling Ontario's Starlink contract. Let's play that clip.
To support the federal government's efforts, Ontario will also launch its first round of retaliation. Starting today, LCBO, the largest purchaser of alcohol in the world, will begin removing U.S. products from its store shelves. Also, starting today, all U.S.-based companies will be banned from taking part in government procurement. We're ripping up Ontario's contract with Starlink. It's done, it's gone. We won't award contracts to people who enable and encourage economic attacks on our province and our country.
So that's the reaction that we're seeing. We saw footage of workers removing American alcohol, particularly bourbon from Kentucky, from the shelves, making a big deal about it. I find this kind of funny, Clyde, because, well, we already purchased those bottles, right? The LCBO purchased those bottles. So they're taking the alcohol that they already paid for and saying that we're going to refuse to try to make any money off this product that we've already sold. I don't know what they're going to do with it. Doug Ford also threatened legislation on grocery stores. This was reported over at Juno News, that they were looking to force grocery stores to label all products as whether they're Canadian or American, so that consumers can choose to boycott the American products. And then this is the big one. Ford said that Ontario is prepared to escalate the trade war by imposing a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the United States, and potentially even cutting off power if President Trump moves forward with more tariffs. So this is where things get a little bit scary. Like yes, it hurts to have that 25% goods and services tax, but when you start cutting off sort of like critical infrastructure and the ability for people to heat their homes, I mean, presumably once you close that door, you can't reopen it. Like if Ford does that, the Americans will seek another source of electricity, and even if we resolve this issue, they're never going to come back to us, and that could really permanently hurt the relationship. What do you think?
Well, it absolutely would. It absolutely would. But I want to get people to put their emotions aside for a second and listen to the things that Doug Ford's saying. Ontario, the LCBO in Ontario is the largest purchaser of alcohol on the planet. Shouldn't that be alarming that our government is running the alcohol business? It really, it's ridiculous that one entity could be such a large supplier. Canadians should be able to make their own choices. But here's the problem. The Ontario government is jumping in and they're making the choice for you. And they're not trying to convince you of what choices you should make. Now, it was famous a month ago. Doug Ford made the same threat about the Starlink contract. Elon Musk responded to it with, I believe, I'm paraphrasing, but I think it was, oh, well.
Yeah.
He doesn't care. I mean, $100 million in the grand scheme of things for a billionaire who has $1 billion businesses, $1 trillion businesses possibly at this point. Doesn't care, and he's really motivated to push people towards freer markets. And really, at the end of the day, it's Ontario, and it's Ontario that's saying we don't have free markets. We don't have free markets because we don't allow businesses, grocery stores, everything to purchase alcohol. We control all these items. So I think Ontario should take a step back and start freeing up their own personal market within their province and then having more free markets with the other provinces before they come to the table and start talking about what Donald Trump is doing on the international stage. I think they have a few lessons to learn on what free trade actually is before they start spouting off about it.
I hope that that's the message they take, but I'm not super optimistic on that one, Clyde. I want to get your thoughts on this one more thing. You posted on X the other day basically the polls showing how the Conservatives have basically blown a lead. And you wrote, "This is inexcusable. Obviously, the Liberal Party wants to win, but I'm not sure when the Conservatives decided that they don't. Somebody needs to get fired." So just real quick here, like what's happened in the last 3 months? How did the Conservatives blow such a massive lead? Did they really blow it? Are the polls to be trusted? And who do you think might who should be fired? Let me ask that.
Okay, so there's a bunch of factors in this whole thing. Now, obviously, the Liberals, they got rid of Justin Trudeau, so they're going to climb in the polls immediately. This has been said across the country, and especially in the maritime provinces, where MPs were getting letters from their constituents saying, "I like you, but I won't vote for you if Justin Trudeau is the leader." So they were polling for Pierre Poilievre simply on that. So you can see a lot of the support being lost in the Conservative Party just based on that. Now, of course, the Conservatives have come back to, show that they're very, they're friendly to Liberal voters, and it's been plaguing the Conservatives in Canada for decades. This whole idea of if we have our base and we can upset our base as much as we want, let's try to capitulate and be what we said earlier, Liberal light. And I don't think that strategy is working out for them. They need to switch gears because it's happening again. It's happening where they had some popularity because of a bad leadership on the Liberal side, but they're bringing in a new guy. Now, if you look at it, for example, for the average Liberal voter, when the Liberals under Carney, who's going to get in? We all know this. They had to disqualify a few people to make that happen, but he's going to be in. And he's coming to the table with telling people he's going to get rid of the carbon tax. So obviously the Conservatives have lost that messaging. That was the real strong messaging that they had. Now they don't have that messaging because it's the same as the Liberals. And then what do we have? Most people are worried about the trade barriers, the trade tariffs. Same messaging. We're looking at all these different situations around Canada. It's a lot of the same messaging. We're going to build homes. We're going to do this. Whether the Liberals have taken a lot of the Conservatives' messaging, and the Conservatives have come to the left quite a bit, and they're kind of meeting in the middle. And with a populace that tends to generally vote left, it looks like that's the way they're going to go. Now, one thing to measure is if the two parties are looking very similar, what people are going to do at the polls, and I'm talking undecided voters, they're going to look at the resumes. They're going to look at the resumes of Pierre Poilievre, and they're going to look at the resume of Mark Carney. Now, I think Mark Carney's resume is trash. I almost slipped a bad word out there, but I think it's awful. But for the average person, they would say, "Oh, Bank of Canada, Bank of the UK. Wow, what a resume! He's been part of all these organizations." And you have the other guy that's been a politician since he was a sophomore. So we can see why people are leaning the other way. And you can see even on the graph, you have other parties like the Bloc Québécois are losing a lot of support, which is going back to the Liberals, as well as the NDP, which has typically been the choice for Canadians as a protest vote against the Liberals from Liberal voters. So this is my guess on this. I know there's going to be a little bit of skewed data in the polls because of the pollsters writing questions in a particular way, but to see all the polls leaning this way is too much. It's not just static. It is actually moving in that direction.
Well, it's interesting. I agree that Mark Carney is not the kind of leader that I want. I don't want someone who is a career civil servant, central banker, involved in the World Economic Forum, a self-described elitist and a globalist. But I can see how Canadians could sort of be fooled by that, especially just at first glance if they don't have a lot of time to get to know him. Well, hopefully, hopefully things still change. And we really appreciate, Clyde, you taking the time to join us today. It's been a great conversation. I hope to have you back on again. That's Clyde Do Something. Thanks so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Okay, so earlier today, I caught up with an independent MPP named Bobbi Ann Brady. She represents the riding of Haldimand-Norfolk in the Ontario Legislative Assembly. I talked about her in the sort of post-election show that I did last week about how she was, a great story in Ontario of an independent fighter who was able to be reelected. So I was pleased to sit down with her earlier, and here is what that looked like. Bobbi Ann, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I said to the audience last week that I thought your victory in Haldimand-Norfolk was the silver lining of a very sort of predictable, boring election. So I want to hear your perspective. Tell us what happened and how were you able, as an independent member of the provincial parliament, how were you able to beat the PC machine?
So beating the PC machine in 2025 seemed a little bit easier than 2022. And I've told media over the past few days that 2022 was different in the sense that I spent much of the campaign explaining to people what an independent looked like, what an independent could do. And, people would say to me, well, good luck, right? And you didn't really know what good luck meant. And so I won by, over 2,000 votes in 2022. We squeaked by. And I think over the past 2.5 years, the people of Haldimand-Norfolk have gotten a good taste of what an independent representative can actually do. And the naysayers and my detractors will say, oh, you have no voice. Well, we actually have a bigger voice in the Ontario legislature because no leader, no party tells me what I can and cannot say or can and cannot do. And the people of Haldimand-Norfolk have really grown to embrace that. And, the money still flows into the riding. So they'll say, well, an independent voice gets no money. I'm no different than any other opposition member at Queen's Park, no different than a Liberal, an NDP, or a Green Party member. And money has to flow to communities. And I said throughout this campaign, you know what? The best way to keep monies flowing into Haldimand-Norfolk is to keep Doug Ford hungry for your vote, and he will keep trying to buy it. And that messaging all resonated with the people of Haldimand-Norfolk. And my goodness, they sent a very, very clear message to Doug Ford on Thursday night.
Well, certainly he wasn't expecting it. The premier himself wasn't expecting it because it was just back in April where you were doing your job. You were doing what an opposition MPP has to do, what people want them to do, which is trying to hold the premier accountable, asking him tough questions, even asking him a question from the political right. He wasn't having any of it. So I'm going to play this clip. This is from April 18th, 2024, where Doug Ford tells you that you're not going to have a job after the next election. Let's play that clip.
In January, I launched a petition calling on this government to follow the lead of Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe. No response, except for carbon tax referendum legislation that does absolutely nothing to help the people of Ontario today. It's a publicity stunt.
You call that a publicity stunt? By the way, you won't have a job next election.
So his caucus sure liked that comment, but I'm sure he regrets saying it now because not only do you still have a job, Bobbi Ann, but you won with a much stronger majority in your riding. You got 64% of the vote to the PC's 24%. So it wasn't even close. The people gave you another mandate. Have you seen Premier Ford since your victory? And what do you think that's going to be like?
No, I likely won't see the premier until we go back for the first day. And, I'm not sure. I work really hard on keeping it classy. And sometimes when those things happen, like that outburst in the Ontario legislature, it's hard not to, be the hockey mom and be all over that. But I might just give him a little wave. I might just, smile at him. I'm not sure how I'm going to handle that. But I will go back to your comment that his PC caucus, seemed to like it that day in question period. Quite honestly, a few of them came to me and told me how embarrassed they were of that comment.
Well, I'm sure he regrets it now at this point. Now, when I was trying to walk the audience through what happened, I was really surprised by your story because typically when you have an independent member of a provincial parliament or legislature or MP, they were usually like a former member of a party that chose to step away so that they have the name recognition and they have the support in your riding. But that's not the case with you. You worked for the PCs and you worked for your predecessor and he endorsed you. So maybe you could walk us through that story and tell us how it came to be that you became the party independent candidate and then MPP.
Sure, Candice. So I worked for MPP Toby Barrett for over 23 years. I worked with many of the MPPs who are currently at Queen's Park for many, many years. You know, I ruined vehicles, I missed family functions, working for the PC family. And, you know, one of the things that Toby Barrett, he was grooming me to follow in his footsteps, but never in a million years would we have expected an appointment. So in 2022, I began in January. I was the PC Riding Association president. I had been for over 20 years. And we began asking for a nomination evening, and the party brass kept saying, "Oh, we can't. COVID has reared its ugly head once again. We can't hold a meeting." And I knew meetings were being held elsewhere across the province, so this didn't make sense to me. So I kept going back. February, I went back, and March, I went back, and I was told the same thing. And I finally said to Toby, I said, "Something's inherently wrong here." And so Toby reached out to the premier and said, "You know, my riding association president is trying to set up a nomination night, and the party brass is, you know, turning her down." And so it was April 9th, 2022. I remember the day very well because I don't cook all that often. And I had cooked all day for my mom's birthday, and we were just sitting down to dinner, and I got a call from Toby, and he said the premier is going to appoint the mayor of Haldimand County as the PC candidate. And so we spent, a week going back to the premier, going back to the party, saying, like, this is very wrong-headed, and this isn't going to work out well for you guys. As the PC Riding Association president, Candice, how do I attract people to come to the table, raise money, make decisions at the grassroots level, when the single most important decision that they can make every few years is choosing the candidate who will represent them? When that is taken out of their hands, it leaves a very bad taste. So, there were a lot of tears of anger, tears of frustration over those days. And finally, I walked into Toby's office one day and I said, I know what we're going to do. We're going to stand up for democracy. And Toby says, "What do you mean?" And I said, I'm going to challenge Doug Ford's candidate as an independent. And, Toby said to me, he says, "I think you're crazy, but let's do this." And, the party was worried. I know that now. In retrospect, I know that they were worried because they told me, "You're going to commit political suicide. You're going to be an embarrassment. You're going to get less than 5% of the vote." And I said to them, "That's on me. If I want to commit political suicide, that just means that there's something else out there for me to do after this. But I've got to stand up for the people of Haldimand Norfolk, and I have to stand up for democracy." So that's what we did. And, I guess the rest, as they say, is history.
And so would you say that you outworked your opposition? Like, how was it that you, without a political party, without any sort of, big machine working behind you, like what do you attribute to that original victory?
The original, I think it was the fact that I have 23 years of experience in the riding. I think they underestimated that when people called Toby Barrett's office, they often got Bobbi Ann Brady on the other end of the phone. And I didn't give them party lines. I was empathetic. I was sympathetic. I never blew smoke. If I couldn't fix something, I would say to someone, "I can't fix it." But if I thought I could fix it, I carried their issue like a dog with a bone. And during this campaign, more so in this campaign than in 2022, the people who came out of the woodwork and posted testimonials online saying, "Hey, I remember back in 2012, I contacted Toby Barrett's office and Bobbi Ann Brady picked up the phone and she helped me. She may not have fixed my issue, but man, she worked hard to try and help me." There were countless testimonials in this campaign and reminded me of the work that I did over 23 years. And my goodness, when people remember that, it really says what kind of people we have here in Haldimand, Norfolk.
Wow. Well,
salt of the earth.
It sounds like you're the exact kind of person that we want representing us in Canada, and we want being our representative. One of the things I noticed, Bobbi Ann, was that voter turnout provincially was really quite low. It was second only to 2022, which was also a low year. But in your riding, so I think it was 46% in Ontario, but in your riding, it was upwards of 56%. And so, do you think that is because the Conservative base showed up for you, or what do you attribute to that disparity in voter turnout?
So I'd say that it was all bases, and it's interesting. I am a fiscal conservative, and it's no secret that I spent 23 years in the PC family, but people of all stripes in this riding, they don't like their small town girl being told she will be out of a job. They also love the fact that I can go to Queen's Park with no monopoly on a good idea. So I've supported ideas from, yes, the PCs, but I've also supported ideas from the Greens, from the NDP, and from the Liberal caucuses. And of course, that ended up on a smear piece of literature on me during this campaign. But people see the benefit in that. If I can support a bill that is good for the people of Haldimand, Norfolk, who cares who brought forward the bill? If it's good for the people, then you vote for it. And my goodness, if we could actually just run Queen's Park like that, if representatives could stop being brand ambassadors and just truly, genuinely represent their community, what a better province this would be.
I totally agree. I feel like so many candidates, so many members of parliaments and legislatures, they just toe the party line, and you don't really get a genuine sense of who they are, what they believe in, what they see. There's so much party discipline in the system in Canada. So what are your priorities for this parliamentary session, and what are you going to try to accomplish?
So first and foremost, I represent a very rural riding. And, this is a government. The PCs have long been, or supposed to be, the government of rural Ontario and of farm country. And over the past 2.5 years, nary a mention of agriculture or rural affairs in the Ontario legislature, in budgets, in fall economic statements. And we have to fix that. We are continuing to bring more and more people to Canada, many of them landing in Ontario. The more people we bring, the more people we have to feed. And we have to cut red tape. We've got to cut regulation, and we have to allow farmers and small business to generate, in their businesses and on their farms, and allow them to stimulate Ontario's economy. But we got to get out of their way. So one of the very first things I'm going to do, and I worked on this prior to the election, is I want to work with the Minister of Agriculture, and I'm hoping that is Rob Flack, because Rob Flack and I get along very well. And I would love to see a standing committee on agriculture and rural affairs at Queen's Park. We're one of the only jurisdictions in North America that doesn't have such a committee, and we need to bring that rural voice back to Queen's Park and put it back on the political map. So that's first and foremost one of the most general, the broader issues I'm going to bring forward. And then we have locally, we have what's called the ministerial zoning order in waiting at the Nanticoke Industrial Park. There is a proposal to build a city of upwards of 40,000 people at an industrial park, at Ontario's largest industrial park. And I think it's the most harebrained idea. There's also an energy project on the table for that same area. So, I really want to work with the government and make sure that we get an energy project at an industrial park. I think that we need power at an industrial park, not people. And so I want to work with the government to make sure that we add to the good paying jobs in our industrial park at Nanticoke, instead of putting people there and driving industry away.
Well, I think that the people are lucky to have you as a representative, and it's been such a great pleasure for me to have you on the show. Thank you so much, Bobbi. Keep fighting. You're such a great fighter, and I look forward to seeing what you'll do at Queen's Park this year.
Great. Thanks, Candice.
All right. Thank you so much for tuning in, Candice Malcom, and this is the Candice Malcom Show. Thank you.